The original 151 Pokemon have been around for over 28 years now, and to this day they are still some of the most beloved Pokemon of all time. I didn't grow up with them personally, but a lot of them still have a place in my heart. However, a lot has changed over the years, and some of these new guys are starting to do crazy things. And then you start to wonder, how are these senior citizen Pokemon gonna keep up with mousehole clicking population bomb? Well, as generations come around and as stronger mechanics, moves, and abilities are introduced, Game Freak has put in the effort to limit the power creep that comes along with it. Some Pokemon outright just got new forms or evolutions, while others got blessed with new tools that either fixed them or gave them more options. But a lot of Pokemon, even with these changes, were just not able to keep up and have been left to fade into obscurity. With multiple different reasons as to why, we are going to look at some of the worst Pokemon from Generation 1 competitively and see how we could fix them in order to reach that potential that they will probably never ever see for a while. Also, for the record, we will be talking about multiple formats, since some Pokemon are clearly designed to be better in one area over the other. Now, the first Pokemon I want to mention is Clefable, and no, it's definitely not because it's on the list. Clefable is the biggest example of what the new fairy type was capable of in X and Y. Clef was already a pretty good mon and had decent stats along with insane moves and abilities, but the main thing it lacked at the time was resistances, which the fairy type granted against the strong dragon and fighting types in the format. This plus 10 more points in its special attack was enough to push it from being good to arguably the best Pokemon by the end of Gen 6 OU's lifespan. However, the fairy type can't fix hot piles of trash, and it's why we have to talk about Wigglytuff today. It also became a fairy type this gen, but it still was not reaching the heights that Clef was seeing. In fact, it wasn't reaching any heights at all, except for whenever Ray Rizzo used it. And I think the problem personally is that Wigglytuff is a Pokemon that wants to do everything, but is lacking a lot of vital tools in order to do, well, anything. Its HP stat is insane, but its defenses are super lackluster, and it doesn't get much reliable recovery. Well, besides Wish, which may need 2 turns, but it also does give Wigglytuff a decent gimmick with its really high HP. Wigglytuff also got another buff this gen with the newly introduced competitive ability, which raises its special attack by 2 stages every time an opponent lowers your stats. However, with awful special attack and no other ways to boost it such as Calm Mind, means that it's not really hitting super hard otherwise. Also, Wigglytuff is just an absolute turtle, which means that you're probably not getting much hits in anyways. I also just realized that for some godforsaken reason, Wigglytuff just doesn't get Moonblast either. I don't even know what to say about this one. But despite all of this damage, like they always say, I think she can be fixed. And there are a lot of ways you could go about this, but I think it would be really cool to focus on VGC for this one. Being a normal and fairy type, it means that it gets access to 2 good spread moves with Hyper Voice and Dazzling Gleam. So maybe we can just focus on it hitting super hard. But before we get into the fun stuff, I think we should do one thing first, and that's increase Wigglytuff's defenses by 20 points each. I think we're at a point where bulky Pokemon like this are popping up left and right, and Wigglytuff would really appreciate the ability to take an extra hit or 2. Now, I thought long and hard about finding a niche for Wigglytuff that none of the other fairy types have, and I think there's one thing we can make use of. That incredibly low speed we talked about earlier. Right now, the best fairy type for Trick Room is behind a $60 paywall, but with a few changes, Wigglytuff can fight Game Freak's pay-to-win antics for us. Now first, Frisk is a cool hidden ability to have, but with tournaments being open team sheet, now it just gives you information you already have, so it doesn't really accomplish anything in tournaments. So we will be swapping it to adaptability. If you don't know, adaptability is an ability that increases the multiplier of your stab moves, which can help Wigglytuff launch stronger Dazzling Gleams and Hyper Voices. But I think we could also increase its special attack by a good amount. I want to say around base 120 is enough to help Wigglytuff deal consistent damage across the board. This plus the adaptability boost to whatever item you're holding makes it so there are tons of multipliers in play as well. Also, please just give this thing Moonblast. I did not go into this video thinking I'd have to say this, but I guess we learn something new every day. Anyway, speaking of Pokemon that lack very important moves, we have one of my personal favorite shinies to exist, and that is Aerodactyl. This thing is actually not that bad. On one hand, it's very fast, and although its attack isn't the highest, it makes up for it with its Rockhead ability, which allows it to use powerful recoil moves without having to worry about hurting itself. This enables Aerodactyl to take advantage of its 2 best stab moves without having to deal with any of the drawbacks at all. Except, wait a second, I lied, it gets neither of these moves. The only recoil move that Aerodactyl learns is Double Edge, and takedown, I guess. Now, maybe it can get away without head smash because it also learned Stone Edge, which is still a really strong rock move. But it absolutely blows when you realize that Aerodactyl's best flying type moves are Dual Wing Beat and Aerial Ace. Now, thankfully, because of how blatantly obvious what Aerodactyl's issues are, we don't have to think too hard about fixing him. And unlike Wigglytuff, we're gonna be giving this thing moves rather than changing anything else. The first move is, well, yeah, Brave Bird. I mean, it just desperately needs this move to have any chance of being good nowadays. And the second one is Head Smash, which hits extremely powerful at base 150. It just feels criminal that these two moves are perfect matches for Aerodactyl's type and ability, only for it to not learn either one. And I partially understand not doing it in the same generation Aerodactyl could Mega Evolve because it would have been another nuclear bomb that we did not need at the time. But we're in new times now where nuclear bombs are around every corner. We're not done yet, as there is a third move I think would be awesome on Aerodactyl, although it's very unlikely. And that move is Flare Blitz. This might sound random, but let me explain. For starters, it's a solid coverage move that also benefits from Rock Head, and it can also hit Steel types, which is the only type that resists both Rock and Flying. But more importantly, it would reward Aerodactyl for making the best use out of Terastallization. Two of Aerodactyl's weaknesses are Ice and Steel, which Fire resists both of them. But also, one of Aerodactyl's biggest weaknesses is getting burnt, which could be solved by Terastallizing into a Fire type. But now with Flare Blitz, you're also giving it one of the strongest physical fire moves it could make use of as well, which helps it a bunch since its attack is still not the greatest otherwise. I was also debating on whether or not we should raise its attack, but it already does get great stat buffing moves like Dragon Dance and Hone Claw, so I'm not sure if we really need to. And I also just did not feel like thinking so hard for a Pokemon that isn't even in the game yet, which, by the way, I would have loved it so much if it was. Please free this thing, Game Freak. Also, I just wanted to say, if you made it this far into the video, it would mean a lot to me if you liked and subscribed. I'm now starting out, so you could get to say that you were one of my first subscribers, and it would let me know that I'm doing a good enough job, I think. The next Pokemon we need to talk about is arguably the worst of the evolutions, and that is Flareon. And you guys don't understand how depressed I am that I just said that, because it is my favorite evolution as well. Which, hey, if the Pokegods can hear me, please add this thing to Pokemon Unite. Yes, I still play that game. Flareon is just a Pokemon that is meant to hit really hard. Its attack in general is just nuts, hitting a base 130. But it also gets the ability Guts, which gives it a 1.5 times boost if Flareon is afflicted with a status condition. So yeah, it kinda just sits there and nukes things with Flare Blitz, and you know, hey, that sounds incredible until you notice that literally everything else about this thing just sucks. The worst of it all is just how poor of a concept Flareon is in general. Guts is a great ability, don't get me wrong, but good god, Fire might just be the absolute worst typing for it. For one, you resorted to being poisoned rather than burnt, which isn't the biggest deal, but you also have to remember that the only viable option for a physical fire type move most of the time is Flare Blitz. This means on top of the poison damage and potential hazards, because hey, by the way, you're also weak to stealth rocks, you're also taking insane amounts of recoil as well. Sure, you could just simply not run Flare Blitz, but please know that your second best option barely hits half as hard, so good luck knocking anything out. Now, I still think we could fix Flareon, although it will take a Christmas miracle for that to happen. The first thing we need is a base stat change, but evolutions have a specific way of distributing stats. If you didn't know by now, all 6 of these base numbers are always the same, except they're rearranged differently on each evolution. So I think the best thing we can do here is just swap them around to look like this. You can also swap the HP with the speed to make it a little bit faster and, in my opinion, a little bit better. But what matters now is that we can actually click moves without getting outsped all the time and, well, dying. Now, the next thing that Flareon would love is more coverage options. Moves like Earthquake and Psychic Fangs would be a really good start, and you could honestly get super creative with this. But I think the move that would help Flareon the most is U-Turn. It would give Flareon a solid option to pivot around, which helps a lot with stopping the poison damage from scaling over time. And I think with this, we solve a lot of Flareon's problems except for one. You still might only get to click Flare Blitz once or twice before you just implode. And it's probably fine now that we could click other moves as well. But after 9 long generations of being outclassed in every game, Flareon is much more deserving to freely click its fire attacks to its heart's content, which means we're giving it Sacred Fire. While this will probably never happen considering it's a signature move and just the fact that the move is outright broken, there aren't really that much much other options for physical fire moves without recoil. I know it might be a little too much considering Sacred Fire is probably what's keeping Entei relevant to this day, but if it's one of my favorite Pokemon, hey man, I'm willing to let it slide. The last Pokemon I have today, as it stands currently, is the only Gen 1 Pokemon to be banned from OU, restricted in VGC, and designed to be the quote-unquote world's strongest Pokemon. And don't get me wrong, Mewtwo is still amazing. It's really fast, it hits super hard, it has insane coverage. Yeah, no, this thing would be too good to use normally, which makes it a good thing that it's a restricted Pokemon in VGC. But now put this thing up against every other restricted Pokemon and oh my god, it's arguably the worst of them all. Okay, maybe not the worst, but considering the competition consists of Pokemon that could do things that are just downright unfair, leaves Mewtwo in a really weird spot where it's too good for regular formats but nowhere near good enough to keep up with the other restricteds. I mean, just look at Calyrex Shadow Rider for a second. It's a psychic type that hits faster and hits harder than Mewtwo, but it also has an ability that is not just Mewtwo's hidden ability, but it also gets the added effect of a special attack boost with every knockout it gets. But you also gotta ask, out of all of the hidden abilities you could have given Mewtwo, why did they go with Unnerve? This is the exact problem, honestly. Mewtwo just doesn't get anything insanely broken and unfair, and now you're here to change that. Now the first thing we should do is give it something to stand out from all the other restricted psychic type Pokemon. And the first thing that comes to mind is to give it Psychic Surge for a hidden ability. Being able to set up psychic terrain not only powers up Mewtwo's psychic attacks, but also allows it to have a better matchup into other terrain setters. But more importantly, it means you are not limited with your support choices, since Indeedee was almost necessary before to set that terrain up. Now it could be something that offers a lot more depending on your team. The second idea I have is probably nuts considering the coverage Mewtwo already has, but there's one type missing that might actually be the most important. So we're gonna give Mewtwo Dazzling Gleam. This allows it to have a much more viable Terra choice with Fairy, since dark types are all over the place in VGC. And having a spread move that isn't expanding force would be nice to have. Now the last thing I wanted to figure out was Mewtwo's speed tiering. It's a little awkward because while base 130 is nothing to scoff at, again, when you compare it to the really fast restricted legendaries in the format, it is not keeping up with any of them. Well, except for Zamazenta, but that thing does not have to worry about taking your hit or two. Now, making it faster than Calyrex is for sure overkill, but I honestly had no clue whether or not to make it faster or slower than Miraidon. On one hand, if you're slower, you get your terrain off when you both enter the field at the same time. But on the other hand, Mewtwo still does not appreciate strong Electro Drifts or Astro Barrages, or heck, even a Shadow Ball from Flutter Mane, since that thing is also faster. If you wanted Mewtwo to live up to being the world's strongest Pokemon, then I'd put its speed up to 136, just to beat Miraidon and Flutter Mane, or heck, even 135, so it could cause some speed ties that nobody would enjoy. But there you have it. That's how I would redesign some of the original Generation 1 Pokemon to be a little bit more viable in today's format. I'm pretty sure this is where most other YouTubers would redirect you to another video they made, but unfortunately I cannot do that since this is my first video, so bye!